This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 550, entitled "Only 7% of British women declare themselves as feminists." Description: according to Milo Yiannopoulos, only 7% of British women declare themselves to be feminists, while 3/4 of British women say they believe in equal rights for women. This means that masculists will have an easier time persuading women to menfair the gender laws than would be the case if a much higher proportion of women were feminists, whom the majority of British women see as manhaters and don't want to be tarred with that brush. Flyer itself. Only 7% of British women declare themselves as feminists, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I was watching a video of Milo Yiannopoulos, the young British gay public intellectual, talking to a mixed-sex group of people about feminism, in which he said something that really made me prick up my ears, which is not something that happens very often to me when it comes to manosphere matters. What he said was that, quote, "In the UK, only 7% of British women declare themselves to be feminists, when about 3/4 of women said that they believed in equal rights for women." He then stated that, paraphrasing somewhat, "The reason for this is that British women associate the word feminist in the current context with the concept of man-hating and didn't want to be tarred by that brush, so rejected being labelled by the term feminist." Unquote. This statistic I felt to be highly significant for the following reasons. I'm a masculist, a politically minded masculist, who believes that masculism will impact the lives of billions of people the way feminism has over the planet, once the pill allowed women to be able to choose reliably the number of kids they wanted. And since they wanted to have only 0, 1 or 2 in most cases, and since men have given women science-based medicine, household gadgets and higher education, women now have time on their hands. Even those who spend a few years staying at home, looking after very small kids, have a life expectancy of 85 years and hence a career window of half a century. So masculists like myself put enormous moral pressure on women to get off their fat parasitic asses and fib up, that is, become FIPs, equals financially independent persons, by bothering to get career competent educations so that they become FIPs as adults and not expect fluffy style, brackets, fluffy, equals traditional woman who expects to live off the money and labour of a man, thus manslaving him for decades, which is to masculists the greatest of all gender crimes, brackets, in either direction, male to female or female to male, close brackets. That is so serious that masculists see it as a war issue, a decades-lasting gender crime that millions of women commit against men, which makes masculists hate such women, who spit at them and severely punish them by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, forcing their fluffy genes to be removed from the gene pool, that is, effectively exterminating them. Masculists see manslavery by fluffies as literally 1,000 times greater crime than was Negro slavery in the US in the early 1800s, since there were several million Negro slaves at the time, whereas today there are several billion man-slaves and hence several billion fluffy man-slavers, whom the masculists are aiming to wipe out by forcing them to fib up, to convert themselves into fips or to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and spattered, hated by an ever-growing proportion of society as masculist and MGTOW ideas spread across the planet, as is now happening, thanks to the influence of the internet, allowing individual masculists and MGTOWs to upload their ideas and political visions. Masculists see themselves as abolitionists, but in the 21st century. The US and UK abolitionists of the 1800s saw Negro slavery as a moral abomination. In the US, it was even a war issue, since it was the root cause of the US Civil War that killed over 1 million US soldiers, 500,000 US soldiers. In today's world, masculists are at war against their two main enemies, the fluffies and the fluffy feminists. The fluffies are hated because masculists see them as manslavers, as stated above. Masculists have an even greater hatred of fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts, who see men as cash machines to pay for women to have babies, who are seen by the masculists as both hypocrites and genociders, since these women want equal rights with men in the parliaments but reject equal obligations with men in not fipping up and sharing equally the burden of earning the living, so behave as feminists in the parliaments but as fluffies in the divorce courts, butchering the lives of one father in 4, a truly massive and truly hateable gender crime against men. These fluffy feminists have made divorce so toxic that they have made marriage and paternity toxic for men, so that in many countries now 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and reject paternity, thus crashing the birth rate and wiping out whole populations. But these young men are merely reacting to the toxicity of the divorce courts taken over by the fluffy feminists in the 70s, who know nothing of masculinist ideas at the time of writing, that's July 2022. So, by default, have traditional expectations of men, that is, seeing men as existing on this earth to pay for women to have babies. Thus masculists see these fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts as indirect genociders, so they have to be stopped, with bullets if necessary. When populations have their very existence threatened, they often go to war to eliminate the threat. Thus the masculists are at war against the fluffies and the fluffy feminists. So to hear Milo's statement that only 7% of British women declare themselves to be feminists was music to my ears, full of gender political consequences. The main difference between the masculists and the MGTOWs is in their politics. The MGTOWs don't have any politics. They are politically passive. They are not fighters, unlike the masculists, who have declared war on the fluffies and the fluffy feminists, who want gender laws passed that are much fairer to men. Masculists have a whole gender political program that is aimed at liberating men from such major gender crimes as women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, etc. This is the end of part 1.